Hi, and welcome back to the panel room. I'm your host, Jim Nettles, and tonight we're going to be diving into one of our favorite topics, and we have brought in a room full to dive in and talk all about creating our favorite fantasy worlds. So let's go around and see who is bringing in their bad influences this evening as we create lands all far, wide, near, and, well, probably a few of them that cause all sorts of mayhem. So, Jamie, you're up first.
Well, I'm Jamie Garner. I'm a professional author and editor. I write under the pen names Jamie Garner, Amelia Quantrill, and Temple Hart. And yeah, fantasy is one of my big jams. Science fiction kind of goes along with it, and both are all big about creating new worlds and civilizations. So here we go.
Kristin?
Hi, I'm Kristin Jackson. I'm a graphic designer. I work mostly in the film industry, fantasy, and I'm not really a writer so much as a reader, although I've written a couple of little short fics. But yeah, fantasy worlds and sci-fi were like my foundation principles as a kid, so I'd love to talk about this tonight.
Amy?
Hi, I'm Amy Kaplan. I write as A.L. Kaplan, science fiction and fantasy and depressing poems. That's me.
Jenny?
Hi, I'm Gini Koch. I write the Alien Catherine Kitty Cat series. I also write a bunch of other series under a variety of other pen names and in all lengths and genres.
Ken?
My name is Ken Lange. I write lit RPG and mythic science fiction, and alternate history and fantasy worlds are kind of what I do.
Wendy?
Hi, I'm Wendy Van Camp. I write science fiction and fantasy, and my specialty is speculative poetry. I am an editor, a writing coach, podcaster. Let's just say I wear more hats than the Mad Hatter. And I'm happy to be here to talk more about creating fantasy worlds.
So I want to start with really what I know is a very simple yet a very complicated question. And this is the notion of how do we really define that idea of a fantasy world, right? It's because we've got to figure out at what point do we cross over from taking our real world influences, and at what point do we say that we're into that fantasy kind of a world? And what is it for you that you love about playing with this notion of and creating fantasy worlds? So, Jamie, I'll start with you on that.
Oh, that's just a giant question. So let's see what we can do.
That's it simple.
So, there is a certain notion of impossible things, okay? Like that is when you interject an element into a world that is an impossible thing in the real world. So like you can get away with one or two and you're like an urban fantasy where you're still not really having to build a whole new world. It's just a little edge, I think it's around when you get to 3 or 4 impossible things, you're starting to really plunge over the edge. Of course, naturally, this is just going off of like the base real world and then starting to add things. But then if you go for something like entirely whole cloth worlds, well, you kind of kicked it off from the start. It's more what fragments you're taking from Earth and Earth history and then reworking into this fantastical thing where it's more a more invented fantasy than it is normal reality. Right. And that's a very broad and vague definition because it is one. It's almost like this is a feel thing, right? It's more feel and less a hard numbers thing. I mean, as for how to go about it, like where to start with it, there is so much engaged to that. I would say, however, I can only go from my own processes because in December I released a big, epic fantasy cross of film noir. It's technically set on a very distant, very strangely altered Earth, but in essence, it's basically building from whole cloth. There are no humans. Every remnant of civilization from before is gone. So where I had to really start was with what inhabits the world, right? Because worlds are very much based, you could do a story about a completely barren world with no life, but that'd be a really boring story, and it would end in probably like a paragraph. So, as with building a story, you start with character. Building a world starts with its people, because so much of especially civilization, is defined by the people that are in it.
So, Kristin, while you're not writing these worlds, you're doing plenty of other things and helping create them. So, for you, what is it you love about creating fantasy worlds, fantasy ideas, fantasy cultures?
I guess for me, I don't even know. I don't really create so much as I just illustrate other people's visions. And most of the stuff that I've been working on just of recently is generally horror. But we
Horror's
do
pretty fantastical.
Actually, we did have the thing I just did last week was a concept that would be fantasy drama. So kind of angels and that sort of thing. So you're looking for inspiration that's very ethereal and light and very dreamy and lots of sunlight and filtered light, that type of thing. But just on the personal level, for the sorts of stories that I really was inspired the most by growing up was, I guess the one that originally, just first thing that comes to mind would be Marion Zimmer Bradley's Darkover. And like you were saying with the people, you start with the people and the complex relationships and you build out from there. So if the people and the relationships are not believable, you could just describe a great alien planet, but it's kind of empty if you don't fill out the relationships and how people are relating to this alien world. So I like that sort of storytelling where you're building a world with the people in it and have a very believable system of how they're connecting to each other, whether it's politically or the society. You're creating something that's believable and people live in it. And that story, if you tell it well, can be told by many, over many stories, over many years. And other people can even come into that world and play in the same sandbox and create similar believable stories. So I think to me, that's kind of the best way, is you're visually and emotionally creating a world that is other people can live in for a period of time.
Amy?
Funny you should mention visual. I also have an art background. So my stories tend to be very character based, but the visual aspects of where they're walking around and where they are, they grab me. And I just like creating and putting them in someplace different. Now, I've done both things. I've taken Earth and I've kind of blown it up and rebuilt it. And I've created other worlds, like the one I'm working on right now is desert world, the giant with lots of dragons. I had so much fun making it, and then I'll figure out which parts actually go in the story. But it's just creating that whole, the environment, the mythos, the culture, what clothes are they wearing, what are they eating. I go down a little research rabbit hole sometimes, but I love bringing all that in to make it more real, because I want my readers to walk into a fantasy world and feel like that they're there. They're with my character, not just watching from afar.
Jenny, how about you?
The extreme linear writer starts with the character. Description, especially when I was first starting out, was really difficult for me. And I met an agent who was really kind and really helpful. and he read some of my stuff and he said, "You're not comfortable with description, are you?" I said, "I'm not, because I can tell. No one needs to know that the room is 40 feet by 40 feet." Right? Because I was doing everything like a DM would describe a room. And, so Dungeon Master, here, you've walked into this dungeon. Nobody needs to know that, right? So I've gotten better, but it's still something I struggle with. And another early thing was like a beta reader said, "I know you know what's around. I know you see this world in your head, but it's just blank. I can't see it." So I worked hard with description, but it doesn't interest me at all, right? So I get to the point where now I can do the description of the world, but it's really what Kristin said. It's all the characters. How are they interacting with the world? What is in this world that is helpful to them and harmful to them? What's unknowingly against them, unknowingly for them, things like that. So I like doing that, but really for me, pretty much I've seen the visions, right? Because I see all the stuff my characters see, and I see all the things they're going through and everything else. And in my epic fantasy, all I saw was an opening scene of a woman in a black cloak with a big staff and a big bird on her shoulder walking through snow. And that's all I had for years. I had no idea what happened, but I knew what they were. So for me, I build out from the characters. The characters will tell me what I need to see around and the history that is necessary for me and the reader to know what's going on. But a lot of times I find it out as we're going, which is exciting. Because Amy's way is like, she already knows, and my way is like, oh my goodness, there's a whole section of this world where things just float. Isn't that grand? So it's all in how you do it, and thank God for editing and being able to go back and fix anything you need to impose. But yeah, for me, it's absolutely, you start with I start with the characters. Who are they? What do they want? What do they need? Why are they here? And then where are they? And I build out from that.
Ken?
Well, I start, as you know, I start with the history and the mythos and build all that, and then I design characters to make that happen. And so that's how the Nine Realms saga came about. I had an idea, and it's really about, like I said, the relationships, and it's the details and the mythos and the history. Once you get all that together, in the real world, things don't have to necessarily make sense. Like if you were to put murder hornets in a book and then not mention them again for 3 years, your editor would be mad at you. So the books have to have a consistency to them and a way they make sense. And in essence, that in itself is a fantasy world. So, but yeah, it's basically the history and the mythos for me, and the system of how everything works. And then you design the characters to fit in that world. Now the lit RPG stuff that I write, I design the characters first, and then the other stuff. So
then you just blow up the world around them. I know.
yes, as you say, it's autobiography there. So, but yeah, it's mainly about how the world works in balance, and how the history and the mythology work together to make it function.
Wendy, how about for you?
Forgot my microphone there for a moment. Like a lot of the other authors here, I generally start with a character. It's usually a character wakes up in me and doesn't stop yammering in my ear until I start writing his or her story. And the world just sort of unfolds around that one character. But in the case of fantasy and science fiction, I find that I like to pause at a certain point. I like to get most of the story arc settled in my mind first and learn more about my characters through the rough draft process so that I understand them more as people. They're not characters to me, they're friends in a certain sense. They're like real people to me. But once I get to a point before things really solidify in the story and in the world building, I pause and then I start figuring out, what do I need in the magic system to make the story work? What kind of structures needs to be to create the kind of atmosphere I want to create for this world? And then I spend time designing these elements and then figuring out where they fit in with my original story. And at that point, I merge everything together. And this can be for a novel, short story, even for poetry. I mean, I just wrote a dragon poem that was nominated for a Riesling. And it's basically a mother and daughter dragon chatting with each other throughout the poem. And it's kind of like what you might expect a mother-daughter conversation to have. But of course, they're dragons, and I worked in a lot of fantasy elements once I got the cadence of their conversation in the poem. So it really depends on you. Don't beat yourself up if your method is different than what we're saying. As you probably have heard from everyone speaking, every author develops a method that works for them. The key is deciding what works for you. So I think I'll just leave it at that, and I'll be brief.
Well, and I mean, I think we've all hit on this first, right? It's the characters, it's the people. And in fantasy worlds, one of the most fun parts of building it, for me at least, is figuring out the culture. What are the belief systems? What are their traditions? Food. Amy kind of hinted a little bit at that. To me, I mean, I always have a lot of food and drink and things like that in any world I'm in, because that's such a necessity, and it's a cultural connector. No matter where you're at, is how all of that kind of stuff works for me. And when I look at building fantastical worlds, when I look at these things as to how far do we want them to be familiar but yet different. And so, Kristin, I know when you are helping bring people's visions to life, that's one of those things too, is getting that and helping to translate that notion of it to the page. But in creating this, what are the elements that you like to pull on the most to make that feel real?
From the perspective of creating a pitch deck or a series Bible, where you're taking somebody's written concept and then bringing it to life for the reader through all the visuals, I usually like to read through the story and then use the visuals to sort of capture the essence and the vibe of the story. And my particular style for creating a pitch deck is I'll pull out a particular detail, an object, something from the story, and incorporate it into the art. So it's more than just generic like AI art where you're just saying, create me a visual of a haunted house or whatever. You're pulling out some specific detail from the story and bringing it in to tie the words to the images. And just, from the sense of creating visuals in just fantasy in general, I really appreciate when authors create a story that does have some sort of real life tie that people can hang on to. So as opposed to just throwing them completely into just a crazy space, which is why, like, something for me, which was sort of fantasy related, part of the subgenres where it's superhero fantasy. I think that's where the Ant-Man and the Wasp movie, Quantumania, that kind of failed, is because they threw people into this crazy, just incredibly detailed fantasy world, but they really didn't give a link for the audience to attach to. And so they just kept throwing all this crazy fantasy stuff at us. and it was just mind-blowingly beautiful eye candy, but it wasn't relatable. And so for me, when I'm looking at whether I'm telling something visual in a pitch deck or whether I'm the audience and I'm reading something, I really like to have something that is a grounded piece of reality that you can drag in there, and the audience, no matter how fantastical the world is that's created, the audience can connect to it and use that to build off of.
So, Amy, how about for you when you're creating? What are the things that allow you to make the world feel real?
Well, it depends on the different stories. The one I'm working on right now was actually inspired by a drawing someone had brought to a critique group. We did a little writing exercise, and it was just a black and white of a dragon. So I ended up with, well, that was the springboard for having the dragons. And in this case, I think it was the fact that for that little snippet that I wrote, that first 250 words, my character was leaning against a wall and burning her back. So that told me that this was a very hot environment and had a building, so structures. I knew it was a city, and it was just little things from that pulled the rest of the world out of it. I had a vision almost immediately of how she was dressed, how this other person was dressed, and that put me in part of the environment inspired by a specific part of the real world. And then that's snowballed into, well, if that's the environment, these are the plants that would be around, and these were the kind of foods that they would be able to eat. And it just kind of built from there, from that one little scene, and it just expanded into first the city, and then, oh, well, they're going out of the city. And I discovered as I was writing, I probably pants this one more than anything, that there were 3 distinct cultures. And as I got to each one, I had to stop and go, oh, yeah, I guess I should probably think about what these different cultures are like. I kind of did them as I was writing the story. It all still centered around the characters, but they kind of drove where the story was going and what other environments that I was going to be building in, and the different cultures and the different beliefs and the foods. It's got to have food. I love
Gotta
food.
have food.
Gotta have food.
Jenny?
Can you repeat the question? Because I kind of got wrapped up in Amy's description and lost where we're going.
Well, it's kind of that idea. What are the elements that you have to pull in to make the fantastical world feel real?
I think it's all how your character relates to what's around him or her or them or it or whatever. There's a lot of debate in science fiction, you know, when we feel like it, no one's ever written a true alien. How would we know? Okay, I'm not writing for true aliens, I'm writing for humans. So humans have to be able to relate to your character in some way, shape, or form, or they're not going to be interested in your story. So for me, it's more, how is this world working? Again, for and against the character. What is the character? What's the character's whole point? You know, what are they trying to do? And what is this world throwing against them, whether intentionally or unintentionally, that inhibits or slows them, so they have to become creative and work around it? You know, if all they had to do was walk a mile and climb up Mount Doom and toss the ring in, you don't have a story. Okay, you have a trudge. Okay, oh, I'm really kind of tired. Oh, come on, it's only another half a mile. Boom, there's nothing opposing them. There's nothing in the way. It's super close, right? That's not an interesting story. The reason everybody is still in love with Lord of the Rings is because the characters have a goal. All of them have goals. Some of them more than one. Some of them multi-layered goals. And the entire world seems set against them. So as they struggle through, they have to overcome what the world has waiting for them. So you have to know your character and know what your character can do easily, what your character can't do easily, what your character wants, everything that you're going to throw in their way to prevent them from getting it until the end or the end of the series, and so forth. So for me, it just all really boils down to character and what you need to put around your character or characters to make their story interesting.
Ken, how about for you?
Well, of course, I have a lot of food in my books as well, but a lot of times I take the worst week out of the person's life, and that's what the book is going to be about. Because the rest of the week, they can't go 24/7 like that. But so yeah, that's usually what I do is I take the worst week or month of their life that year, and that's going to be the book for that one. But it's really like Janie was saying, it's about how they relate and react and sticking to the rules that you assign that character. If you start having them act one way and suddenly have them act a different way that is totally out of character for them, you're pulling the person out. So there's got to be a lot of consistency there too, consistently being who they are. And that goes for not only the writing, but the narration as well. If I know that's not part of this, but that was one of the things that got me. I lost a lot of narrators auditions over that because they weren't staying consistent. But yeah, consistency and knowing how they react and having a well-developed world of where they're going and how they're getting there. Of course there's going to be obstacles, but and yeah, I do the 40-foot room too sometimes, but
Probably more acceptable in lit RPG than it is in sci-fi.
Yeah, well, I do it in some of my urban fantasy too, because we're dealing with superpowered individuals, and throwing somebody across the room when it's 5 foot wide versus 40 foot long is a different story. So, but it's having the consistency and the ability to make everything feel and sound and taste as real as possible. And sound, people forget about how important sound is in a book.
And smells.
The birds and the smells. And if you don't put those in there, not everybody will notice it, but it doesn't feel as vivid. So,
yeah.
Wendy?
I think Ken took away what I was about to say. One of the things people comment about when they read my prose and my poetry, actually, for that matter, is how real my worlds seem. They don't feel they're reading a book. They feel they're actually in the place, and the people seem like real people to them. And I do this by putting myself into the character and making note in my mind all the physical things that are going around me and bringing in things from all my senses. And I try to work in at least 3 senses into most of my scenes. Usually it's sight and sound, because those are very obvious. But I try to work in smell, and I try to work in even taste once in a while when I can. Touch, of course, is another big one too. But I try to juggle that so that more sensory inputs are coming in for the world around me. But it's a balancing act. If you get too detailed in what the world is, that hampers the reader's imagination to imagine. And I know some writers go, but how are they going to see the world the way I do? Well, to be perfectly honest, through media, through television and film, All our minds have been trained in certain ways to visualize things on certain cues. And if you can give them enough of a cue to go into that, you would be surprised at how closely the reader is going to be seeing the world the way you portrayed it. Now, this was not true in the past because there was not this visual learning that we go through for the past 50, 60, whenever television first started in film. But we are now. And we're looking at this media from birth. So as a writer, you might want to try to learn to tap into that, because I know as a poet, I use that to do a lot of the heavy lifting for the visuals for my poetry. I mean, I write sci-fi-ku, which is science fiction themed haiku poems. I have 3 lines, 17 syllables, and yet I still manage to tap into these visuals of the world, and people just imagine so much more, and they don't know how I do it. But, of course, that's just practice. So what can I say? But you, again, as a writer, you need to learn how to work these visual cues and make sure you draw from your own life, from your own personal experience. It goes back to write what you know. And even if you're in a fantasy world and your people are wielding magic and all this other stuff, they still have basic human ways to move and to feel and tap into that kinetic feeling of the hand moving. For instance, when I was in college, I took fencing for 1 semester, not because I wanted to fence, and believe me, I was the worst person on the team. You wouldn't want to see me there. But when I took the class, I made a note in my mind, how did it feel to do the thrust? How did it feel to balance? How did it feel when a sword hit my sword during the class? And what was I supposed to look for in a sword play? And I remember these details, but they're sensory details. They're not like how to do a sword play. That I can get out of a book. But the sensory details that I learned during that class stay with me, and they add a realism if ever I have to write about sword play or tussling battles or whatever. It comes back to what you know. So I think that's a good thing. So remember at least 3 inputs, and that comes from something I learned from Diana Galbadon, who wrote the Outlander series. She advocates making sure you use at least 3 of the senses in most of your scenes. And I challenge anyone to look at her work and not feel like you're just submerging into her world. She's very good at this kind of thing. But it's a formula, and drawing for what you know and working in enough senses to cue the reader so that they can go into that gestalt, that visual language that we've all learned. We may not know that it's there, but it is, and learning how to tap into that. And it'll make you a very strong writer.
Jamie?
I think when it comes to making fantasy believable, I think, again, everyone's made great points. I think, though, the things I like to focus on are a twofold. One is relatability, which several of us have talked about, because, yes, again, we may be talking about worlds where there's not a single human being, but humans must understand the characters. So we could do some wild experimentation with certain kinds of fantastical beings and strange plateaus, but there's still got to be something that feels human, that we as a human can relate to and latch onto. And I think the other thing, I think it's what a lot of people talk about, they mean realism when it comes to fantasy. And gonna be a maverick here and say, no one actually means realism. They mean plausibility. There's this distinct and subtle difference. Dragons are not realistic, but there is something about dragons, and they're described well, that they feel plausible. Given it, you put them in a world that's fantastical, it's like, oh, that's a natural extrapolation. I can visualize that again. When it was talking about something universal, like our universal experiences, it then turns into a plausible thing. A lot of things are plausible when they're just given those little things that make them real. Like Kristin, when talking about creating the visualizations for some of these worlds, she specifically mentioned, bringing those real bits in for the reader to grasp onto. That's the visual version of that's the visual version of the thing I'm talking about, the literary version of, which is a really roundabout way to say what I'm trying to say. but it's all about having foundational things that you can grasp onto. And then when you build off of that, doing it in a way that there's a line of logic, even when it's dealing with the most wondrous thing. There's a logical line that a reader could go connect, connect, connect. And then they'll believe it. Well, they'll believe it enough. You'll have the, suspension of disbelief. You can't strain, and that's where plausibility comes in. It prevents the straining of that disbelief so that you can do incredible, crazy things, but it feels just real enough, just plausible enough that your reader's in for the ride.
So, kind of to build on all these notions, right? There's the next level of this, which is how do you do the research to help build your fantastical world, right? That's part of the great joy we all love, is that research rabbit hole, going and finding that little whatever thing they were like, oh, this will be fun to play with. That's how dragons work. Or this whole notion of, oh, well, that's how this governmental system works, or this is why this belief system works, or this is how we can create a, little bunny with big teeth that will wipe out the soldiers, whatever it is we happen to need. So, Amy, since you brought this up, this notion of the research rabbit hole and the fact we all love to trip over those, how do you go about this when you're going and trying to leverage things from reality, or potentially even researching how other people have approached certain fantastical ideas?
You mean how do I find things?
How do you use them? How do you do the research, and then how do you kind of adapt that for your world?
Well, I've done research in two different ways. There was a time where I had a job at the school art library, and we had to patrol the stacks. Well, that got me into the habit of just randomly walking through a library, pulling a book out at random and just looking at it. And I got a lot of ideas that way, and found out little obscure details that who knew I had no idea existed, like a specific sword master from the Middle Ages who would draw what looked like a little wolf. It was the Poussin wolf. Don't know who he is, but I don't remember. But I got that, and that was inspiration for something that for a wooden sword that I made in grad school, and the runes that I carved on it as well. I also, yes, old school library. A lot of the research I do these days is doing online searches, but I always try to find a backup, because don't believe one source ever. I've also contacted people. Everywhere I go, I talk to people, and if I run into someone who is an expert in a specific field or something that I may use someday, I'll grab their card. I mean, I got a card from my daughter's old karate teacher who's is volunteered to help me with any fight scenes. I know another person from that I used to work with, musician. So, I've sent him a story and at one point, and got ideas from him for bringing in the correct music aspects for what I was doing. So there are a lot of different ways. I like talking to experts or people within fields. I like searching online. Don't get me started on searching up information on silver marks, because I've been way down there on family heirloom things trying to research, and there's a day and a half has gone by. But that's how I go about it. But I also keep a notebook. So when I find something I want, I print it out, or I keep a file, and I have my notebook next to me with all sorts of cool things that I may use or I may not use, but I have them. Newspaper articles.
So Jenny, how about you? How do you go about diving in some of these research rabbit holes
I'm
and looking to
embarrassed.
leverage
Okay.
them?
The amount of research I've had to do for the Alien series and most of my science fiction, I practically have an astrophysics degree from all of it. I know far more distances and stars and this, that, and the other than you would expect for the light and frothy fiction I'm coughing up. The amount of Old West research I've done, massive. That entire shelf back there, that's all Old West reference books. And there's more around. I don't research anything for fantasy. I don't think I've ever looked. I desperately, when you asked, I'm like, oh my God, I have nothing, not a thing. Okay, to the point where in my epic fantasy, I have ice volcanoes. And my husband, Mr. Mechanical Engineering Major, says ice volcanoes are impossible.
Part of the point.
That fantasy world with an incredible amount of magic in it. Its magic is actually a natural resource. 2 weeks later, he embarrassingly shows me that they found ice volcanoes on Uranus. So, bazinga! I don't need to do the research, gang. It just comes to me naturally. I just don't. And I'm like, oh my God, I have urban fantasy, not a whit of research. I have epic fantasy, not a whit of research. I haven't researched anything for these potentially ever. And I'm trying to think, it's like, yeah, no, I have post-apocalyptic that I feel I could count as fantasy setting. Nope, just extrapolation and my knowledge of the West. So I do nothing, kids, and it's still working for me. So you do you.
So Ken,
Yeah.
since Jenny does no research and knows absolutely nothing useful at all.
You know
Oh,
what?
Ooh.
It's working for me.
Yeah.
I need to
It works.
mention. Okay.
can't argue
I
about
do not
results.
research for science fiction in the Old West. Leave me alone with my happy little magic systems.
Well,
I'm just getting ready to duck as something flies by me.
Yeah, man. Like, okay, hang on. Fuck you, man. Okay. This is my process. Okay. It's a crappy process, but it's a process nonetheless.
Wing it. Love it.
there you go. So I did a lot of research on fire ants, for instance, because I have one of my races in my books is an insectoid race that I based off of fire ants. So I combined that with grasshoppers and crickets and a few other things to do the movements. I actually have to do the research. It doesn't just work for me.
I just got
I'm not that fortunate.
I just got a visual of locusts with little fire ant heads that bite and
I don't think you need to research that, Ken. Just put little tin hats on the locust and let it run. Let it rip.
Well, these guys are actually, like 9 feet tall. So,
Yay.
Big hats. Okay,
Yeah.
big top hats.
get up some top hats. Yeah. Do the Warner Brothers song.
Yep.
Yes, we are of like mind. See? None of that required research.
that is an accumulation of experiential knowledge.
Which
You're
isn't
leveraging-
research. Which isn't research. Research is learning new knowledge.
So Wendy, please save me.
Well, I'm a little bit like Jenny. I don't
Oh, no.
do a lot of
And so Jamie,
research. Yeah, no. Let me explain
Yeah,
what I
no,
do.
go, go.
There might be a budding writer out there who would like to know the process.
Mhm.
Now, I like to watch a lot of YouTube, and I have people that do like ancient sword play, or I have others that like to recreate costumes from the medieval time period and what goes into their costume and why and the historical significance. And I watch a lot of this stuff. I don't really write down a lot of the details, but I kind of have a photographic memory, and it absorbs in there. And I pull from it because when I do descriptions and things in my books, I don't like to drill down too deep because I think it's off-putting to the reader. I want to just put in just enough to bring it to life. And when I watch these things on YouTube, that impression is enough for that to do that. Now, granted, I do maps and things. Like, for instance, if I have key buildings in my story, I will actually draw a schematic of it and keep it so I don't get lost in the building and I know where it is. If there's furniture, I like to write down what that furniture is, what color it is, just so I don't forget. Same with my characters. I have character sketches of their wardrobe, and if they have wardrobe changes, I write each of those changes down and where, in what part of the story they take place. So if I need to go back and edit, they're not suddenly changing eye color or something like that. So I think this kind of research for your book is very important. It goes into your story Bible or journal, as I call it. And I think it's very important to keep those kind of details. But I think it's really good to let the world come into you and let you draw from those experiences more kinetically, to just let it seep into your writing naturally. And I think you might have better results on that. Now, granted, if there's something specific that you need to know about, when I write science fiction, I do have to study a little bit about natural science, movements of space stations and spaceships and things like that, because I don't want some science geek to come back and bother me. You know, what was the famous example? Larry Niven in Ringworld, where he had the sun going in the wrong direction. He didn't hear, he basically had to listen to this complaint for years because he made that mistake, and he finally changed it in the book. So I don't want to be that writer. So, and I love the man to death. He's really a sweetheart. But you want to at least get your details correct enough to create the effect you want in your book. But I don't actually recommend doing huge gobs of research. One, you're using up a lot of your time that you could be creating your books. And two, if you get too much detail, it detracts from the writing itself. I don't think you need to go that deep. So watch enough, absorb it, whatever you need for that particular time period. Let's face it, if we're writing fantasy, we've read fantasies, I'm sure. We've seen fantasy movies. We have all this shared settings and ideas that we can draw from. And the only things I would write down is decide on your magic system. Make sure that you have it written so you're consistent with it throughout your book, because consistency is very important. And make sure that you write down your settings, or if you have a special MacGuffin, make sure you write down the details. You know, if the magic sword has a flame or whatever it is, make sure you have enough details so that you remember it properly as you come back to it throughout your story. But as for heavy research into all this other stuff, you know, a lot of this is arbitrary. And just make enough notes that it's good enough for you and leave it at that. Because I just don't think that going that deep, we're not all Tolkiens, okay? We're not, Tolkien was a professor of archaic language, and it was his thing to create languages and things, and that was his joy. So naturally, he put that into his books, and we enjoy it today. It's survived how many, what's it been, 100 years? I mean, it's been a long time. So that's okay, but that was his jam. It's not necessary for your book unless it's something that you enjoy doing yourself. So I think I'm just going to leave it at that. Just have fun with it and don't let the research bog you down.
So, Jamie.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Research. Yes. Research. So here's the deal.
Hey, like, why are you asking me, sir?
So here's the deal. Research is one of those things that is very easy to do too much of. It's just like it's very easy to do too much world building and be caught in the constant trap of building the world. You're going to put the characters in, and then research about the world, to build the world, put the characters in, to research about, to build. You could see how this can get stuck in an endless loop. So I think it's very important to kind of everyone's got a different comfort zone when it comes to research and all that. So everyone's got to go with your gut. You have to go with your heart. There is no one process, as we've talked about. One thing I think that's important, though, is to know when you're saying something that if you write something, you write a scene, it sounds inherently like that seems dumb, or that seems implausible, or that seems like it would never work. That may be a time to stop and do a little research. Often a lot of things that seem implausible or like deal breaking, 5 seconds of Google.
Wait,
do hit a couple sources.
You mean like ice volcanoes?
But see, ice volcanoes don't sound dumb to me. They sound awesome and cool because it's a magical world. Well, and then that's kind of comes into where like your implication of like the magic and like what makes it fit in the genre elements. That's where those come in. Yeah, on Earth, most people would think a ice volcano is dumb, but when you're doing a cool magic thing, you've already decided there are ice volcanoes. Then there are ice volcanoes. No, it's that whole thing like when it just feels really wrong when you're trying to do something. How about we put it this way? You're trying to do something that's grounded to a degree. Especially when it comes to like building a world and like a society or beliefs or whatnot, and something feels dumb, like people shouldn't act this way, then take a look. I mean, stop, look, and listen, and maybe do some research if it's like an appropriate thing to research. I find religion, if you're dealing with a world and everyone has faiths and beliefs, no matter what they are, what kind of being they are. So I think, weirdly enough, I think religion tends to be one of the things I wind up taking a stop to research the most. Not because I'm trying to copy a world religion, but it can sometimes be helpful to go, wow, people can believe all sorts of implausible things. So it makes me feel better when I write something that sounds crazy. But then I do some research. Oh, no, that's fine. There's actually some people that believed that in our own history. So I think just a lot of it is go with your gut, go with what feels comfortable doing. And don't get stuck in the trap of over-research, because that will kill you. I have known people that have written millions of words of world building and never written a single word of actual story. Don't be that person. Don't do it. Okay? Remember. All right, I'm done.
So, Kristin, when you're pulling it into your art, how do you decide what elements? I know you're pulling a lot of this from the story, but are there things that you're doing to help build the images, build the decks, build the pitches for all that for you that would be helpful?
Well, for one thing, you want to just express whatever the genre is. If it's going to be fantasy, it needs to feel like fantasy. If it's going to be sci-fi, it needs to feel like sci-fi. I want to echo, my style is a lot more like Wendy's, where you're wanting to do research enough to create the vibe, create the feel for what's going on, but you don't want to just get so lost in the details, and you could do that with too much research. You get bogged down, and one of the fun things about creating fantasy or creating entertainment in general is the readers need to have something to imagine. I recently read there's a science fiction book series, and I was all the way through, halfway through the second book, when I realized that the author had never really told me what the main character looks like. And then I went back, I reread everything. No, he didn't. It was so, this character is so fixed in my mind as to what he looks like, but I realized I created it myself. They did such a great job of telling this story that I didn't even mind the fact that I have no idea what this guy looks like in her mind, which was really interesting. So, on my laptop, I probably could be questioned by the FBI as to why I have so much blood splatter on my in my folders. But a blood spatter for stains or against the wall or chunky or whatever pools. But if I wanted to create something, you want to have some element left to the imagination of the person who's reading it. And one of the great sins in television and movies in general too is that you don't want to have exposition dumps, where you have this massive amount of information all spelled out for the audience in this long monologue where they're detailing everything, you need to show, not necessarily tell, in the way that you're allowing the, like Wendy was saying, you're allowing the reader or the audience to experience what's happening without necessarily writing down every single bloody detail. And I think it can be a problem too, because if you get somebody who works in that profession, like swordplay or, Civil War history or whatever the detail is that you're going on and on about, you might get something wrong, and then you'll have a whole tribe of these people who are very, deep experts on this subject. They'll be like, boy, you got that wrong. Just like the sun is going around the wrong direction. You need to have it be educated enough so you know what you're talking about to the audience, but not so lost in the details that you're essentially writing, you're doing a Ken Burns documentary. So I think that there's limits to what you're doing when you're trying to create something for somebody else to read and understand about the world. Be wonderfully creative in the general sense, but come and bring in the specific details only when it adds to the story and not necessarily becomes the story.
So, as always, we run into the thing of, especially when you start hitting a topic this big, we'll only be able to hit the surface. But now I'm going to go with the question, which is, and Jenny, I'll start with you on this one. When we look at this notion of creating our fantasy worlds, what's one thing we have not touched on that somebody really should know, or at least contemplate? We haven't touched really on politics, much to Jamie's point, religion. I love to play with belief systems and all of that. We haven't touched on politics. We haven't touched on a lot of these things, or even just the worlds themselves, the environments. There's a lot of things we haven't touched on. What's something that you think somebody needs to consider?
I'm actually going to give information from a friend of mine, Maxwell Alexander Drake. Drake writes epic fantasy, and he and I are exact opposites in how we do it. I literally do all is there politics? Yeah, I layer it in as it becomes necessary. It's all somewhere in my hindbrain. What Drake does, and I think it's a really good plan, especially for people who really need to feel like they know everything about the world, he gives himself a time limit, 3 months or 4 months, depending on the book. And he starts his clock, and for those 3 or 4 months, all he does is world build. He builds everything, he writes everything, he writes all the religions down, he writes everything down. And at exactly 3 months or 4 months, his alarm goes off and he can be in the middle of a sentence and he is done. He turns that into his publisher, and 9 times out of 10 are like, this is great. And he's like, that's not the book. That's the world. Right? And he says part of why he does that is that way he knows, like when an elf is walking by a door with a certain symbol on it, the elf's reaction to that symbol, he knows what it should be. And the elf's reaction tells the reader without a long drawn out explanation what that they find that offensive, but the barbarian next to them does not. I'm just using it as an example. Does not. Right. So obviously that's a human thing that the barbarians like, but elves find that, right. And he said it allows him that he knows how every character should react, therefore, and what the political climate is, what the religious climate is, everything else. But if it isn't in there, it's not in there. If he didn't get, sorry, my camera keeps slipping. If he didn't get it in those 3 or 4 months, it will never show up. It is not allowed to show up. So I think the rigidity of the timeline is really good. Maybe you should only give yourself a month, maybe 2 months, right? But it does allow you to do all of that deep, meaningful creativity that a lot of us do want to do when we're creating big, new fantasy worlds, while at the same time forcing you to be quick about it. You can't dilly-dally forever, because if you've written 3 sentences and 3 months goes off, you're done. So I really think that that is a really great way. And since I don't do it, like I said, I give you Drake's advice because not everybody can handle, hey, it's just all in my head. And I've seen it work really, really well for him and for other people who follow it.
So Ken, what's something you think that we need to throw out there?
Well, I mean, so I'll use the Nine Realms saga for this one. The religious basis in that book is based off a lot of mythos and stuff of our current world, but kind of viewed from a different viewpoint. And so, depending on how you handle your religion, and I take them to the extremes because what's the fun of mediocrity there? Same thing with politics and governments. If you're going to have a crooked FBI agent, you'll want a crooked FBI agent. If you're going to have a very bad government system, go all the way. We want to go into the full-blown, empire, for instance. You want Darth Maul and Darth Vader and the Emperor, and you want them kind of stomping on people and have them fight against it. So I'm one of these people. I feel that if you're going to get into it, you need to take them to the extreme, and the same thing with the personalities. I think that if you're going to develop I think a lot of people focus on making a single evil entity in the book, a single bad guy that is just super bad. But what happens if you take a group of people and just have them be a group of people? They're so much worse than the one bad guy, so, and that's kind of what I do. I take that idea and I kind of just push it to the edge of believability, and the mob mentality of humans is well known. So I just kind of, like I said, I think that people focus too much on trying to create a magnificent villain, when what you really should be concentrating on is the people in it. The people that work for this guy. The henchmen need to be believing in this crowd, and they need to be like wholeheartedly involved. Otherwise, you got a bunch of innocent people following the wrong guy. But when you have a whole bunch of people enthusiastically behind the bad guy, it's a lot easier to mass murder people, which my characters do.
So Wendy, how about you? What's something we haven't touched on that we want to get out there?
I'd like to believe in balance when it comes to characters. And this comes to my building of the government system or religious system or the ultimate life universe and everything for this universe. I like to never have a quote unquote evil character. Everybody has shades of gray. The good people have their flaws. The evil people have good within them, even though maybe it's suppressed or it's misguided or whatever the situation is. I tend to favor established religious or governmental models, especially for my fantasy. I still go ahead with the king, queen, prince, princess, that kind of thing, just because I feel it's part of the trope of that. With science fiction, I generally, instead of having kings and queens, I do corporations and things like that because I feel it lends better to the setting. But I try to keep what I think of as a balance in my universe. Things always equal out. You can't have good if there isn't evil and vice versa. It's that yin-yang kind of thing. And I think as a writer, as you build your world and build the societies that your characters are going to inhabit, you need to keep that in mind. But when it comes to telling the story, again, it comes down to that main character and the main arcs, the arcs of the subplots of the adjacent characters. And you want to make sure that you don't lose focus on them because they are what they are the ones that the reader lives the story with. And you don't want to interrupt that flow with a lot of extra things. Like in my Alice in Wonderland piece that I've been working on for years, it's a labor of love, and I don't know when I'm going to finish it, but I'll never give up because I love the story. But it has a Queen of Hearts, and she's definitely very evil. She's rather psychotic in some ways. But in other ways, she still loves her son, the Prince of Hearts. She's still, even though she's taking kind of mental control of her husband, deep down she still loves him. There's a balance there. And I think this balance is what makes the character a lot more interesting. I mean, you can have the Queen of Hearts going off with their heads, but if there's no underlying reason behind it, why is a reader going to be interested? So you got to keep that balance in mind when you're creating all this stuff. And I love Jenny's idea of having a time limit on research. It's that, Jenny, I'm going to remember that. What a great tip that is, because that's
easy. All Drake. I got to give Drake the credit on that one. I am merely reporting.
Yeah, it's so easy to be sucked into research, and I think we're all guilty of it. And I have learned to take a step back and to try to let my stories progress organically and to tap into that humanistic core for each of my main characters so that they become real people to me, the writer. And when they're real to me, hopefully they're also real to the reader. And I just think balance is the key.
Jamie?
Okay, got a simple, straightforward tip, and that's this. If at any point the world building that you've done beforehand interferes with what the characters are, where the characters want to go, where the story is taking you, change the world and let the characters go. The character's natural progression is way more important than the fact that you established it like, it's 5 silver bits to a golden bob. And you are ultimately the god of the universe. Yes, you're trying to do plausibility and stick to all of your guns and establish your systems, but character and story trump anything. Always, always stick with those.
I'm not a benevolent deity to my characters.
So you don't have to be benevolent. I'm not saying it has to be what they want to do, what they have to do, or what has to happen to them. It's not always good. Usually ain't. But
so, Kristin, anything that you want to bring up or that you want to mention?
Yeah, I think just for me in general, the having relatability in the characters, clear motivations. Why is the bad guy doing what he's doing? Or why is the good guy doing what they're doing? What's their motivation, and is it clear? And like Wendy's saying, the shades of gray, having a villain who is like a Bond villain that's, I'm gonna blow up the world unless I get $10 million. Ha ha ha. And really, you just want him dead. At that point, you don't care about anything about that person. Just write him off. So to have a more fully developed, realistic world that you want people to want to return to, you want to create some sort of relatability in the character. So you want to go back and see the story through their eyes or experience something through their eyes. And you want to appreciate things that are, relatable in some form or fashion.
Amy?
I'm going to just kind of build on what other people have said because you've already got a lot of stuff. But like what Jamie was saying about don't be afraid to change things that you have already built if that's not where your characters are saying this things are going. You have to be flexible and go where the story leads. I will put in one little thing, though. I love Tolkien. But please, please, please don't do what he did in naming your characters with a Sauron and a Saruman and an Arwen and an Eowyn. Drove me crazy trying to keep those characters sorted out. So keep that in mind when you're creating things.
Yeah, I've screwed that up one time. Well, thanks for going through and a pretty deep dive in creating fantasy worlds. But before we get out of here, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys and the fantasy worlds they need to be stepping into and adding to their to be read list. So, Jamie, you're up first.
Well, like I said at the top of the show, I write under 3 different pen names. You can find all my stuff, however, quite easily by going to jbgarnerwrites.com or following me on Facebook or Blue Sky, JB Garner Writes. Just search for me, you'll find me. Ginger Blue Publishing has released all my latest books, including this thick, chunky girl. That is my epic fantasy meets film noir murder mystery, first in a series. Also, plenty of delightful fantasy maps, which, honestly, if you write fantasy and you're doing world building, you don't have at least one cool map, like you should turn in your fantasy card. My latest release is actually next month, already on pre-order. Injustice, the second book of the Push Chronicles, my epic superhero altered reality tale. It's available for pre-order at Barnes & Noble and Amazon. You could get purchase links at gingerbluepublishing.com.
Kristin?
I guess these days the place I'm most likely to be found is on Blue Sky. So it would be at anycat68, ANICAT.
Amy?
You can find me at alkaplanauthor.com. And if you do at alkaplanauthor on most social media, you will more than likely find me. And check out Mark of the Goddess. It's a easy read short story fantasy. And there'll be more coming.
Jenny?
GiniKoch.com. And if you want to sign up for my free newsletter, hook me up. You can do so at the bottom of most of the pages there. I'm also all over Facebook, still on X, Twitter, on Blue Sky, and Pinterest. My latest release was in my trade paperback release for Natural Born Outlaws, Legend of Belladonna, Book 1 by me writing Z.E. Stanton. But one of the books I was talking about is The Night Beat, which is first in my Necropolis Enforcement Files series. So that is urban paranormal that there's probably research in there somewhere, but don't look for it.
Ken?
You can find me at kenlangauthor.com. Same thing on Facebook. I don't know what my handle is on Blue Sky. I'm still trying to learn how to use that.
I think you're at Kim Lang. So.
There you go. Jeannie's trying to teach me. I was about to say that. So I don't go on certain. I still have a page on X, but I haven't been to it in years. So pretty much Amazon, most other bookstores, and my website is probably the fast way to find me.
And Wendy?
You can find me at wendyvancamp.com, spelled just as you see here at the bottom of the screen. I have a free monthly newsletter on Substack. It's at nowastedink.substack.com. And in that, you get a personal ramble from me. And yes, trust me, it's not that bad. A free writing tip essay. And, of course, my poem of the month. I also am found on Instagram. Usually I recommend people, if you just want to follow me on social media, look for me there at No Wasted Ink. That's my handle there. But I have a link tree on my Instagram, which gives you a link to everything. So if you want to follow me on Blue Sky, you want to follow me on Facebook, you want to find my Substack, you want to find my podcast, all of it is on the link tree at Instagram. And again, that's No Wasted Ink. So there we are.
And you can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentialsworkshops.com, creatingpros.com, and of course here at ConTinual. And go stack up those to-be-read piles. Step off into those fantasy worlds.